Something is going to go wrong. Maybe it already has. Maybe right now, something in your life is broken, unfinished, or simply not the way you hoped it would be. A plan that failed. A relationship that ended. A version of yourself that did not work out. A season of your life that left marks you did not ask for. This is not pessimism. It is just the honest shape of a human life. Nobody gets through without difficulty. Nobody arrives at meaning without passing through some version of loss. The question is never whether hard things will happen. The question is what you become because of them. This video is about resilience. But not the simple version. Not just bouncing back. Something more interesting than that. Most people think of resilience like a rubber band. You stretch it under pressure, and when the pressure releases, it returns to its original shape. Back to normal. Back to before. That is one kind of resilience. And it is genuinely valuable. But there is a question worth asking. What if returning to before is not actually the goal? What if some experiences are meant to change you? Not damage you. Change you. What if the most honest response to certain kinds of difficulty is not to return to who you were, but to become someone you could not have been without going through it? That is a different idea. And it has a name. Psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte spent decades studying people who had been through serious adversity. Illness. Loss. Trauma. Life-altering events. They were looking for something specific. Not just who recovered and who did not. But whether some people came out of the experience genuinely changed in positive ways. What they found surprised many people. They found that a significant number of people who endured real suffering reported not just recovering, but growing. Developing a deeper appreciation for life. Stronger relationships. A clearer sense of personal strength. A new understanding of what actually matters. They called this post-traumatic growth. Not post-traumatic stress, though that is also real and should never be minimized. But the other thing. The thing that happens when someone moves through the worst of an experience and discovers something on the other side that they did not have before. According to Tedeschi, studies have found that as many as 89% of people who survive serious adversity report at least one aspect of positive psychological change afterward. That is not a small number. That is the majority of people who go through hard things. Not because suffering is good. It is not. But because the human response to suffering, when it is met with honest struggle rather than avoidance, often produces something remarkable. This brings us to a concept that goes even further. In 2012, the philosopher and author Nassim Taleb published a book called Antifragile. His central argument was that things in the world can be divided into three categories. Fragile things break under stress. Glass shatters. Plans collapse. People who cannot handle uncertainty fall apart when it arrives. Robust things resist stress. They survive pressure without changing. They return to the same state. And then there is a third category. One that Taleb noticed had no word in any language to describe it. Things that actually get stronger from stress. That do not just survive difficulty but use it. That come out of the pressure more capable than they went in. He called this antifragility. And his argument is that human beings are designed to be anti-fragile. The evidence is everywhere in biology. When you exercise, you stress muscle fibers to the point of small damage. And then, during rest and recovery, the body rebuilds those fibers thicker and stronger than they were before. The stress was not the enemy. The stress was the mechanism. Your immune system works the same way. Exposure to a low level of something harmful triggers an immune response. The body overcompensates, building defenses. And the next time that threat appears, you are more capable of handling it. This is why vaccinations work. This is why children who grow up with some exposure to the ordinary messiness of the world tend to have stronger immune systems than those kept in entirely sterile environments. This biological principle even has a name. Hormesis. The phenomenon where low doses of a stressor produce a beneficial, strengthening effect. Too much stress breaks the system. Too little stress and the system never adapts. The right amount, at the right intervals, with adequate recovery, builds something stronger. Taleb argued that this principle applies not just to our bodies but to our psychology, our habits, and our lives. People who have never faced difficulty tend to be brittle. When something goes wrong, and something always does, they have no experience to draw from. No internal evidence that they can survive hard things. No muscle built from previous effort. People who have faced difficulty and moved through it carry something different. Not toughness in the cold, disconnected sense. But a kind of grounded confidence. A quiet knowing that they have been here before. That the ground eventually becomes solid again. That they can handle more than they thought. That knowing cannot be given to you. It can only be built through experience. This is not an argument that you should seek out suffering. That would be a misreading. It is an argument that when difficulty arrives, and it will, the orientation you bring to it matters enormously. Because the same experience can produce very different outcomes depending on how a person meets it. Two people can go through similar hardship. One collapses and stays collapsed. One struggles, and then slowly, quietly grows. What makes the difference? Research on resilience consistently points to a few key factors. The first is meaning-making. The ability to find some thread of meaning in what happened. Not a toxic positivity that pretends the hard thing was secretly good. But the honest human ability to ask, what does this experience teach me about myself? About life? About what I want to do with the time I have? Viktor Frankl was an Austrian psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps during World War II. He lost his wife, his parents, and his brother. He survived conditions that destroyed many around him. After the war, he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. His central insight, drawn from his own experience and from observing others in the camps, was that the people who survived were not necessarily the strongest or the healthiest. They were the ones who found a reason to survive. A sense of meaning that gave the suffering a context. He described watching fellow prisoners who had given up. Not physically broken, but inwardly collapsed. They had lost their sense of why. And without the why, they had nothing left to endure for. He also described others who, in conditions of extraordinary cruelty and deprivation, found ways to give. To share their last piece of bread. To comfort another person. To hold on to a mental image of someone they loved, a future they were working toward, a sense of purpose that the guards could not take from them. These people, he observed, had something the others did not. Not safety. Not comfort. Something internal. something that belonged entirely to them. He wrote that the last of the human freedoms is the ability to choose your response to any given set of circumstances. That is not the same as saying circumstances do not matter. They do. But within whatever circumstances exist, there is always a small space. And what you do in that space defines you more than the circumstances themselves. He wrote that those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. Meaning does not make the suffering smaller, but it makes the person bigger. The second factor in resilience is connection. Research consistently finds that people with strong social support recover from adversity faster and more completely than those who face it alone. Not because other people solve the problem, but because being witnessed in your difficulty, being known, being accompanied, this has a measurable effect on how the nervous system processes stress. Isolation compounds hardship. Connection metabolizes it. The third factor is what psychologists call self-efficacy. The belief that your actions can influence your outcomes. That you are not simply a leaf in the wind. People with high self-efficacy approach adversity differently. They look for what they can do rather than focusing only on what they cannot control. They take small actions even when larger ones feel impossible. They maintain a sense of agency even in circumstances where much is out of their hands. And that sense of agency changes the physiological and psychological experience of difficulty in measurable ways. It does not require optimism. It does not require certainty that things will get better. It only requires the belief that what you do next is not completely irrelevant. That you have some influence, however small, over the direction things go from here. That is enough. That small belief, held on to in the hardest moments, is often the thread that pulls a person through. The fourth factor is something simpler than it sounds. The willingness to feel the thing. Research on grief and trauma consistently shows that avoidance, numbing, distracting, pushing the experience away, prolongs suffering and delays growth. The difficult feelings that are never felt do not disappear. They accumulate. They leak out in other ways. In low-level anxiety that never quite has a name. In reactions that seem too large for the moment that triggered them. In a vague but persistent heaviness that follows you without explanation. The people who recover most fully from hardship are often the ones who are willing to sit with the pain honestly. Not indefinitely. Not without support. But without running from it. Because you cannot process what you will not feel. And you cannot grow from what you refuse to acknowledge. This brings us back to the beginning. Something is going to go wrong. Or already has. And when it does, the most resilient response is not to immediately look for the silver lining. Not to pretend it does not hurt. Not to be strong in the way that looks impressive but leaves you hollow inside. The most resilient response is to be honest about it. To feel it fully without being consumed by it. To stay connected to the people who care about you rather than retreating into isolation. To look for small actions you can take, even tiny ones, that remind you that you still have agency. To find a thread of meaning, even a thin one, that gives the experience a context worth holding on to. And then, slowly, to get back up. Not the same as before. Not untouched. But not broken either. Changed. In ways that could not have happened without going through the difficulty. That is what resilience looks like when it is done honestly. Not a rubber band snapping back to the same shape. Something more like a bone. Broken, healed, and now stronger at the exact point where it broke. Not in spite of what happened. Because of what you did with it. I hope this video brought you something meaningful. If you find it helpful, please like and share it with someone who may need it. Subscribe if you would like to hear more stories like this. Wishing you a calm and peaceful day.